The RCN has rejected the government's pay offer and they plan to escalate strikes. Now, we know you don't want them to strike, but I just want to start by being clear about how high you think the stakes here are.
Well, Trevor,
do you think lives are going to be lost as a consequence of this strike?
Well, I think it will be a serious strike and it will be a challenge. But can I just pick you up on one thing? The RCN leadership effectively recommended the pay offer. It's the RCN membership that voted narrowly to reject it. There are still other unions that are out there still balloting at the moment. Unison, the largest health service union, represents, I think, a third of all Agenda for Change staff. That's the staff affected, has voted in favour. So let's wait and see where the other ballots come in.
Yeah, well, you're right about the size of Unison, but that represents all health service staff, as you say. But there are 500,000 nurses who have voted, narrowly or not, they have voted to reject the offer. And I really want to just get started by being clear about what we think the cost of this might be, especially if it is escalated into what is now being called the mega strike, where several different disputes coordinate to strike on the same day, junior doctors and so on and so forth. How serious do you think this is going to be?
Well, look, I think the public are very concerned, understandably, and we will do everything that we can, and I'm sure the NHS and management of the NHS will do everything that it can to make sure that that the impact of the strike is kept under control. But I wouldn't be being truthful if I didn't say it will have an impact. Nurses going on strike, it will clearly have an impact, but we think that we've made a fair and reasonable offer, 4% last year, 5% this year, plus lump sum payments starting at $1,250. That is why the RCN leadership and Unison and other unions have actually recommended this offer to their memberships.
But let's be clear, you are not going to do anything further on the offer to avert a possible strike. You are not budging. That's that's a full and final offer.
It is a full and final offer, but we are waiting for the other results to come in from the other unions. As I say, Unison, the largest union, has voted for it.
When you say you're waiting for the others to come in, do you mean you're waiting for the others to come in because what you might do, depending on the results of the GMB ballot and so on, you might decide to vary the offer? Or are you just hoping that the others will vote to accept the offer and the RCN will be isolated? Which one is it?
Well, it is a full and final offer, but equally, it's only reasonable for us. We've been accepted, the offer's been accepted by Unison, recommended by the RCN, but not accepted by its membership. It's only reasonable for us during the middle of the balloting process to wait to see those further results, and we'll be laying out a response. We'll obviously be meeting with the NHS staff unions as well to make sure that we can take that forward. But the position is that we're waiting to see what the other results are at the moment. And we just urge everybody, this is a very, very reasonable offer. It's fair to NHS workers, it's fair to other public sector workers, and it's fair to the taxpayer.
So just to be absolutely clear, and I don't want to say that what you said is interesting, because what you'll immediately do is say, no, I didn't say that. But what I hear here is a government that says, this is our full and final offer, but in a new situation, there may be more talking to be done.
Well, look, Steve Barclay has said that his door is always open, so long as, in particular, there aren't sort of preconditions or strikes taking place. You know, we are willing to talk, but this has been something which has been thrashed out with the unions themselves. This 4%, then 5% offer, the 1,250 minimum post. It's a very, very reasonable offer, Trevor.
So both you and the RCN leadership clearly misjudged the temper of the members. But what I'm hearing you saying here is that the government is not set in concrete. It is willing to talk, depending on what the broad set of results in these ballots turns out to be.
I mean, Steve Barclay is always willing to talk, so long as there aren't preconditions attached, and so long as there isn't the threat of strikes going on at the moment. But as I say, this is a fair and reasonable offer, that has been accepted by Unison, is being balloted by others, is being accepted by... Unison represent like a third of the Agenda for Change staff. I mean, it's a big part of it.
All right, look, Rishi Sunak was supposed to be all about quiet, effective administration, getting stuff done. But now we've got doctors on strike, nurses on strike, civil servants balloting, teachers balloting again, rail workers out there walking off the job. Now, what all these outfits have in common is that they are ultimately in the pay of the government. It doesn't really inspire confidence when your own employees basically are walking off the job.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think Rishi Sunak is doing a very good job overall. He's laid out his 5 priorities of halving inflation, cutting the debt, growing the economy, reducing hospital waiting lists, stopping the boats. Those are the people's priorities. That is what Rishi Sunak is getting on with.
I'm letting you repeat the slogans, but my point is you're not going to be able to do any of that if all your employees are out on strike. And here's your problem. Parents can't be sure that schools are going to be open. Commuters can't be sure that there's going to be a train that gets them to work. The patients can't be sure they'll get their operation. We pay our taxes to make sure that you, the government, keep these basic services going. And frankly, I know you want to say it's somebody else's fault, but actually, that's what we pay you for, and you're not doing the job. Why should anybody vote for you in a couple of weeks' time?
Because I think the government is delivering on, overall, where the people want us to be delivering on. It's obviously difficult times. No one's pretending this job is in any way easy. The inflation that has been unleashed by Vladimir Putin's illegal and appalling invasion of Ukraine,
But there you go again. You're blaming this on Vladimir Putin.
Well, I'm blaming inflation.
Vladimir Putin didn't vote in the ballot. It's your negotiation or failure negotiation.
I'm blaming Vladimir Putin and the increase in energy prices, which is what has driven inflation in the first place. That is why inflation is such a high priority for the government. The halving inflation is absolutely one of our 5 priorities. That is, if you like, the backdrop for why there are increasing pay demands, is to keep pace with inflation. And the inflation is obviously driven. The UK is not alone in this. Okay. Our inflation rate is other countries are also facing very high inflation, similar issues with let
me just give this one more go. The nurses did not declare war on Ukraine. The teachers haven't negotiated the rise in oil in energy prices. This is supposed to be your job. And all of the people that you pay, who you employ, basically are cross with you, let's put it that way, and they are walking off the job. Well, that's a failure of you as an employer.
I don't agree with that, Trevor, actually, because when you look at what's going on in the NHS, for example, there's 6 unions at the moment balloting. As I've already mentioned, Unison, which represents the largest part, about 1/3 of the Agenda for Change staff, their members have accepted. There's other unions balloting at the moment. The RCN leadership implicitly recommended the offer. So the position or the situation is much more nuanced than you are suggesting. Actually, the government is delivering. We're delivering what I think are fair offers to public sector workers. 4% last year, 5% this year. In the case of NHS staff, minimum payments, one-off lump sum payment of at least £1,250. That, I think, most people out there will agree is a reasonable offer.
We've gone over that, but I mean, I would say that you're also delivering late trains and school closures and also delayed appointments and operations. And that's your responsibility, not anybody else's.
Well, it's one of our priorities is to get to grips with NHS waiting lists. And you're right that the strikes do not make any easier bringing down the NHS waiting list. But nonetheless, that is what we are fixed on. That is what Steve Barclay, that is what the Prime Minister is fixed on as one of the 5 priorities, reducing NHS waiting lists.
West Streeting has said this morning to us that he thinks that effectively the RCN are in the wrong in their decision not to provide cover for emergencies. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I think we'd like to see the management of the NHS make sure that the impact of the strike be effectively made as minimal as it can be. Notwithstanding this, will have an impact. But we're relying on the management there to deliver a good programme of care.
But you're not willing to say that this is ethically a wrong thing to do?
Well, it's my job is to, at the moment, I'm waiting to see the results of the other ballots. Yeah? I'm not getting into criticising specific people, how they behave. I'm trying to get a resolution, and Steve Barclay and the Prime Minister are trying to get a resolution to this dispute. But as I say, we're waiting for the other ballot results to come in.
All right, well, very diplomatic. Let's talk about the other big news from this week. Biden's brief visit to Belfast. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said, "It doesn't change the political dynamic in Northern Ireland. We know what needs to happen, and he is not going back to Stormont." So what's the point of this visit?
Well, I think the point of the visit was to recognise 25 years, the anniversary of the brilliant Good Friday Agreement. That's why Rishi Sunak was in Belfast then as well, was to recognise what has been an anniversary which has delivered a lot for the people of Northern Ireland. Obviously, we want to see the power-sharing executive back in place in Stormont as soon as possible. We've done what I think is a really good deal on the Windsor framework to solve that issue of the flow of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, a very pragmatic solution-based approach from Rishi Sunak, finding solutions to problems, getting a good negotiation, good relationship with both the European Union and with President Biden and with the Irish government. That is where the solution lies. OK,
but the DUP isn't going back. You need the Stormont Assembly up and running because there are issues in education, there are issues in health, and all of that's got to be dealt with. When you're going to bow to the inevitable and either opt for direct rule or fresh elections? Well, you can't keep sitting, forgive me, on your hands and saying, oh, something's going to happen. You've got a responsibility to the people of Northern Ireland.
We do have a responsibility to the people of Northern Ireland, and the people of Northern Ireland very much need the government in Stormont to be back up and running and the DUP to re-enter government. That is what our government is urging everybody to do, to come back together. The Windsor framework, we think, offers a very good and workable solution to many of the issues that have been raised. Now is the time to get a devolved government back up and running. But that's work in progress.
All right, let's talk about your pledges. And the big one there is stop the boats. The Home Secretary was on this programme recently, and she said this.
I think we're making tangible progress in a short period of time, but ultimately, yes, you'll judge us on our record.
Let's have a look at her record. She says, judge me by my record. I'm going to ignore the stream of horror that's emerging from our police forces at the moment and just focus on immigration. Prime Minister says stop the boat, but there's still thousands making the crossing each week. There is a deal with Albania, but there have been almost no illegal crossing migrant from Albania returned to Tirana. Nobody has been put on a plane to Rwanda any time so far, and that's not going to happen anytime soon, unless you can tell me differently tomorrow. If you were judging the Home Secretary, what would you be getting this morning? D+? Okay, well, D+ maybe?
Well, first of all, Trevor, there have been returns to Albania.
Yeah, tiny numbers.
Well,
we're talking about 15,000 people who've crossed, and the numbers are handfuls. Come on.
Well, we're getting on with that, and the agreement with Albania, of course, was only signed relatively recently. But working with Albania, it's a combination, Trevor, of taking the sort of tough action, the legislation going through Parliament, which Labour and the other opposition parties have opposed at every point, to make sure that we've got the laws in place to deal with the boats. We've got the agreement with Rwanda. That is working its way through. There's been appeals in the courts to try and stop that. We're working through those appeals. We've got the agreement with Albania. We've got the agreement with France. Again, set by a much better relationship between Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron. We've got the agreement with Rwanda. We are getting on with it. But, you know, it is work in progress again. And Suella Braverman is doing a brilliant job.
there's a lot of work here for lawyers, aren't there? And there's a lot of paper shuffling, moving between here and there. The one thing that isn't moving is illegal migrants back to where they came from.
Well, that is why we're putting through the legislation. That's why we're reaching these agreements with friends and allies as diverse as Albania, France, Rwanda. It's actually really getting the government getting to grips with this issue, which is exactly what we're doing, both Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman.
Well, look, I mean, don't take my word for it. Let's look at what the country thinks. When Suella Braverman first came to office in September last year, 76% of the public thought you were doing a bad job. Today, in spite of all you've done telling me about, you know, the agreements you've made and all the rest of it, 83% of the public think you're doing an atrocious job. You are the party chair. You need to do something, don't you? I mean, isn't it time to put Suella Braverman out of her misery, reshuffle her to somewhere else?
Not at all, not at all. She's doing a very good job, and it is about...
83% don't agree with you.
OK, but...
The people have spoken.
But I've already outlined, Trevor, how we're getting to grips with the job and how we are passing the legislation, how we are coming to these agreements with key allies, but sometimes these things will take time. And that is why, for example, we are starting returns to Albania, we are getting to grips with it, and Suella is right on top of it.
All right. Well, look, you know, the judgment isn't mine and it isn't yours. The judgment is going to... at least, or some part of the judgment is going to be made in less than 20 days' time when you are sending your troops into a local election ballot. Here is the national picture of voting intention. And I think what it will show us is that there is a pretty consistent lead for Labour. Of course, it's been coming off the boil recently. I know you'll tell me that and so on. But this is pretty awful for you, isn't it?
Well, no one was pretending it's going to be easy. Last year was a very difficult year for the country, a difficult year for the government, a difficult year for the Conservative Party. But what we are doing, Trevor, is getting on with the 5 priorities of halving inflation, restoring growth, cutting the debt, reducing hospital waiting lists, and stopping the boats. Those are the people's priorities. Those are Rishi Sunak's priorities. In terms of the local elections, these will be fought principally on local issues. There's a huge number of Conservative councillors up for re-election in a few weeks' time. The Conservatives remain the largest party of local government. The independent expectations are that Labour, the Conservatives will lose more than 1,000 seats and that Labour need to make big gains. That is what the expectation is out there.
OK.
But I've been up and down the country, the Conservatives were fighting really hard. I've got some great councillors.
You're predicting a 1,000-seat loss, or are you just trying to massage our expectations here?
That is what the independent experts, Professors Rallings and Thrasher, John Curtis, are all predicting. I'm saying we are fighting really hard. I've got some great councillors, great council candidates up and down the country. I've been travelling up and down the country the last couple of weeks, all the way from Ramsgate to Hartlepool, from Accrington to Worcester, campaigning. OK,
I've let you do that, but this is odd. You're 1,000 seats, and you seem rather sanguine about that. That sort of shellacking in the past usually leads to a sacrifice of some kind, and the prime candidate is always the party chairman. After local elections, are you going to be the person who's going to come in and defend the tonking that you will have had still, do you think? Or will Mr Sunak move you on?
Well, let's see, Trevor. But what I would say is that those are the independent predictions from the most credible academic sources that the Conservatives are likely to lose 1,000 seats. I'm campaigning really hard. I've got some brilliant councillors and great candidates out there who are fighting to retain Conservative council.
This is really peculiar. If I were a Conservative candidate in those elections watching this programme now, and I hope that they all are, I'd be expecting a bit of Boris Johnsonism here. I'd be expecting you to say, we'll be out there, we'll be eating into Labour's campaign. There's no, this 1,000 seats that they're going to lose. This is all nonsense. We are on... But you're telling them you know what, it's going to be pretty awful.
No, I'm telling them, because I've been meeting with them and seeing them up and down the country in recent weeks, that actually the Conservatives are fighting hard. Conservative councils deliver better. They cost you less tax, £80 less tax on council tax, delivering better services, better action on potholes, lower crime in Conservative areas. These are all kind of real, tangible deliveries by Conservative councils, councillors, council candidates.
Can I just ask you one last quick point? I'm sure that inside Conservative Party headquarters, you're lowering our expectations, but I think you're detecting some signs of hope in the polls. Would it help if the former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who have been making speeches defending their records recently, would you welcome a period of silence from both of them?
Well, actually, in the Conservative Party, the most important thing is getting on with the job of governance rather than kind of these Westminster sort of political machinations. That is what Rishi Sunak is focused on. He is focused on the 5 priorities that we laid out earlier this year, delivering on those 5 priorities.
OK, well, that sounds to me like a clear message to Mr Johnson, Ms Truss. Take a holiday. Greg Hands, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.